Good evening, everyone. I love it. It's like a performance cue. You think this was the Oscars, but actually it's better than the Oscars because this is another evening we get to spend with Lisa Scottoline. And I was looking up in my advanced reading copy, and that's what I'm holding because our signed books are somewhere between Lisa and the Poison Pen currently, but they will shortly be here. And recognizing that Lisa and I met with Everywhere That Mary Went, which was, I didn't count quite right, 30 some books ago. Do you know the exact number, Lisa?
I don't. I think it might be, well, you don't count the memoir, so I think it's like 34, it might be 34, something like that.
How did you and I don't want to say get so old, but how have we stayed together all
No,
this time
I
so
want to
you
tell,
could write all these books?
I want to tell how you were the first bookseller that called me up when you had an advanced reading copy and said, I'm a lawyer. I read your book and I really enjoyed it. And I was like, and it was just so amazing. And it was all the way from Arizona. I didn't even know anybody in Arizona. Now I know you and the people who come to the store and Patrick. But that's how we met. And I am forever, it's in the forever grateful category. It really, really is. And we've just been friends forever. I'm
Well,
so sorry I'm not out there. I mean, when you make these tour plans, you have to like call it. Now it seems like it's loosened up a little, but my whole tour is virtual, sadly, which I can't even hug you. I can't hug the people in the line. And
I'll tell you
like,
what, to make you feel better, our events are BYOB. So I'm going to raise a glass to you and congratulate you because this is, in fact, Lisa's virtual book launch. So lucky us that we get to do this.
it really is. It really is. And I appreciate you having me in this way. And I wish I could be there, but everybody must know that. And I will get there when we all get through this hell.
Well, we will. And actually, Lisa and I have done events in all manner of different places. And one thing that's always been fun at the store is that it's like a college reunion and there are banners that go up. And Lisa sends us, said, what is it, moon pies? Is that what it is that you send ahead? There's some particular Pennsylvania thing.
Tasty cakes. That is a Philadelphia carbohydrate. And you must have it. It has a nice high, preservative. So if you don't eat it this year, you can eat it the next. It's really great stuff. It's not, it's not fresh like a moon pie. It's our thing.
Well, I don't know if that's a great recommendation that has a shelf life of years, but nonetheless.
You can also throw it at someone. It's like a lethal weapon, so it's great.
All right, so tell us about the college reunion thing, because they come with banners.
Well, it's nice because I forget his first name, but I know his last name, I think it's Ben Shapiro, but I'm a Penn grad and Penn Law School, and there's a great super active Scottsdale chapter. And, but I must tell you that I always mention this bookstore and so many people know it all over the country. And it's just so great. I'll go, and I'll tell people signed copies are available from you guys. And they're like, Poison Pen, we know it well. And I just love coming out there. So I'm so sad. As you know, I loved it so much that my daughter and I actually made a vacation in Scottsdale just because we found it from you.
Well, that's true. And that was a really wonderful compliment. And we've had the pleasure of hosting Francesca for her debut novel. And I'm assuming that she's probably working on a second novel. Am I right?
Exactly. She's working away and I appreciate you doing that. And she just loved it. And you guys are amazing. You're just so supportive of my books and our books together. And I really, really appreciate it.
Well, you're entirely welcome, Lisa. And one of the good things about Zoom, even if you're not here, Zoom has some advantages. And one is that we've really gone international. Patrick will tell you, I've said this several times, about 3 weeks ago, he lit up and he said, wow, he said, we just had our first question from Mongolia.
Oh my God, that's amazing. That's probably like the one place you haven't been. Have you been to Mongolia?
No, you're right. It is. And, I asked, it's so funny you said that because when we did Dirk Kussler's event for the first Dirk Pitt that he's done since his dad died, it's set in Nepal and in the Straits of the Philippines and all. So the first thing I said to Dirk was, why is this, a sea thriller, which is what Numa normally is? Why are we in the Himalayas in Nepal? And he looked me right in the eye and he said, because I knew it was one place you hadn't been.
There you go.
Which I loved. It was so great.
So I know anyway, I've been to Scottsdale and Philadelphia and that's it. So.
Well, here we are. So let's talk about what happened to the Bennetts. which is this book. And once again, I will say I'm holding up my advanced reading copy. You can tell from this cool little note there that the autographed copies are on their way from Pennsylvania to Scottsdale, and we still have some you can reserve. But anyway, I don't know. What would we call this? I mean, it's a legal thriller in some respects. It's a domestic thriller in some respects. There's psychology. There's a dog, actually two dogs. One comes in at the end. There's a great dog who is both a hero and actually precipitates some bad action. So
Right. Every dog in the world is both a hero and a villain, right? Mine are especially. So, there's two sides to it, every dog.
there really are. We are having, or just had, a big rainstorm with lots of wind. Our puppies, who are now 9 months old, but were 4 months old and 4 pounds, and we adopted them, have not yet been in a raging windstorm, because we live here in Scottsdale, right, where there's hardly ever any rain. And
Right.
they are both outside howling. They don't want to go out to pee because they might get wet. It's a whole new world for these puppies. And
Oh,
you're
I
right.
bet
They
you're
are
right.
indeed both hero and villain, because, what can I
It's
say?
really great to have a dog that's a drama queen. I have these 3 Cavaliers. I've lost one, but the one has a cone on now, and you would think he is, gutted from stem to stern. It's just like it's a cone. He can't move. He can't walk around. They're very dramatic. They need a lot of help all the time. They're very high maintenance. I mean, I love them like crazy, but they're such funny dogs.
Well, ours are Cavapoos, so they're part Spaniel, King Charles Spaniel, and part Poodle.
There
And
you go.
you would think that they would be water dogs with this heritage, but no, they're really offended by rain. Anyway, in this book, Mooney, who is a small white mutt, has an instrumental role, but we're really going to talk about the Bennetts. Jason Bennett, the dad, a suburban dad, and his family. So set us up, Lisa. What is it, the scene that starts this whole book into motion?
What really starts it is the family's driving home from one of the kids' field hockey games. I did play field hockey badly, but I played, and they're all of a sudden tailgated, and the tailgating turns into a carjacking that goes really, really horribly wrong, and they find themselves with their life turned upside down. They're in the witness protection program, and there's a lot of twists and turns, so it's kind of hard to go beyond that. But I kind of wanted to, well, first off, I got the idea because I was tailgated exactly on the street I described, which really makes me mad. And then I started to just think about all the stuff that, a little bit, we've talked about this before, how plot and character are so related. And I thought, here's this man who's, by the way, a lot like my dad, sort of a kind soul and a gentle soul. And when he's getting tailgated, it annoys him. He can't move over. But I think tailgating is the kind of everyone in the car has an opinion. The wife's like, honey, speed up. The kid like, let's take him, dad. It's a new car. It's a Mercedes. And he's like, he's a little, my dad was like this, not a right fighter, but sort of like, well, I want to enjoy the road. I found when I was writing it, the guy says, I'm a scenic route kind of guy. And I thought, that's so my father. And it's an interesting character, because whenever you're writing any kind of character, but especially for me with a guy, you're trying to limb out what is a hero. We're so interested in what are the limits of personal power, especially nowadays when everything is in tumult. All of our institutions are, we've kind of lost faith in, or at least we're seeing with a more realistic eye. And so he doesn't think of himself as a hero. He owns a business. It's a court reporting business. He's not like superpower lawyer. So I don't know if I'd call it a legal thriller. I think it's more domestic drama, domestic thriller. He has to figure out what he's going to do to get his family through this, because, long story short, as you may know, and I know that our readers know from this sophisticated crowd, WITSEC was for criminals, not for normal families. And when I really found my buddy in the FBI, who's an old friend of mine who worked in WITSEC, I said, what is it like when you have a normal family? He said, it doesn't happen that often. And we started to work through what it would be like for a normal family to leave everything. Like, I still can't believe that, for me, like if I leave the house, which never happens, especially lately, but it's a farm. I have dogs, I have cats, I have lists for people to come and sit things, and chickens that have to be fed, and horses that have to be turned out. And everybody knows where I am and when I'm going to be back. Right? We're all checking in on each other all the time. And I kind of wanted to go to, especially if you're me and you're single, and so you have your girlfriends and they kind of look out for you and you kind of look out for them. All of a sudden, if I didn't show up for yoga, or if I didn't show up to go to the movies or to go on a Saturday morning walk with my friend, she'd go, "What do you mean? You not text me back? That's never going to happen." So I really wanted to explore what happens to a normal family in this really extraordinary situation that is kind of gut wrenching in a lot of ways.
I was going to ask you how you learned anything about WITSEC, because it is, after all, by definition, a secret program
Yeah,
that the ordinary person. So you had an inside source that
I
helped you
do.
work out.
A
Oh,
retired FBI agent who worked in the program. And it was super interesting because here's the first surprise. It's always like this research. I love it, but you always find out that everything you thought was wrong. For example, we had this idea. In fact, Arizona plays into it because when I first this happened, I set the book in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where I live. And I said to him, okay, so when I get in WITSEC, where do you send me? Scottsdale? He's like, no, actually, we'd probably send you to Delaware. I'm like, Delaware is 15 minutes from my house. How can that be true? And he explained that, there's a 6 months period and you're on the auspices of the FBI as opposed to the Marshal Service. And they do it for certain reasons that none of which really made a lot of sense to me. So I was like, you know what? You got to use that. I mean, people, especially your customers, they're smart. They know a lot of police and criminal and civil procedure with respect to these subjects. So you can't pretend that he'd be sent to Arizona when he wouldn't be. Part of his person, I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I kind of have him be a farm boy that all of a sudden finds himself in a part of Delaware that, like, the cover shows. I said, I think there should be water on the cover. It's a salt marsh, and all of a sudden the sand underneath his feet is uncertain. He is not on terra firma in any way, and so then I find myself trying to figure out what happens next, which is my job.
it is. Actually, I was going to ask you why Delaware, and now you've answered that.
That was crazy. I couldn't even believe it. I
Now,
was like, oh, damn, that's not
I'm
what I want.
surprised too, because I would have thought that some distance would be an added safeguard, for people who are supposed to be hidden. But I was thinking, I can't remember the name of it. Patrick may rescue me because he uses the chat function when I have these memory blanks. But there was a movie, it might have been a John le Carre movie, in which they're trying to protect a family. And it's kind of a mobile version of WITSEC in Europe. But the daughter, who just can't leave her mobile phone alone, blows their cover. And
Yeah,
the father is eventually killed. And it seems to me that one of the hardest things about taking a normal family with children, teenagers particularly, and putting them in WITSEC would be to keep them from tunneling out, using
right.
their cell phone or whatever. I mean, teenagers are just, they don't really think strategically all that well, and they're used to being, didn't I say that nicely? And they're used to being networked in, and they don't want to be left out, because it's a pack mentality when you're a teenager and
Right.
the whole bit. And I thought when I started the book, I thought that a complication that you might very well include would be that one of the children will blow it. But unfortunately, it's the older girl, the daughter, who's
Right.
killed
Right.
in like chapter 2. So there we are. Who dies rather in chapter 2. She would have been the one, I think, that would have been the hardest
Well, they
to
don't let you keep the
contain.
phone. I mean, it's so incredible how locked down they are. They just take it. They take everything. And they give you things that you can use. And it was sort of interesting because it was like vis-a-vis why Delaware was kind of interesting too, because he said, I, fe- I sent him to a beach town in Delaware because in winter, and you guys haven't had this issue, but a beach town in Delaware in the wintertime off season is kind of like a ghost town.
Right.
And so it really did kind of work. And then I found out there was like a ghost forest there, which is sort of an ecological thing that happens in a salt marsh when all the trees are killed because salt comes in and kills it. And when you see it, I put the scene in the book, but it's like, it really does look like bones. I mean, the tree gets bleached, but still stands. So it would have all this atmospheric stuff. And then you have this family and they're kind of in a pressure cooker. Because you're right. And I was like, I couldn't credibly have the kid blow it. And the truth, what really starts to happen, honestly, is that they start to implode. they start to collapse, they start to collapse in on themselves. The wife especially, in a way, like when you think about who's connected up, the mom. She's a team mom. She also has a job.
Right.
She's a portrait photographer. My girlfriends have been you're one, have been so sustaining to me in my life. And I know we've sustained each other through divorces and all the illnesses that people have. And that's not a bond that you just walk away from. And I sort of loved that idea that first of all, and she has to leave her mother's in memory care. I couldn't even imagine just turning my back and not even saying to my mom, who she was still text me when you get home. We were still doing that kind of stuff. In the olden days, the 3 rings and then hang up. God forbid you spend money for a long distance phone call. And that whole idea of all of those connections that are the thing that connect you, going away. And what does that do to you? And how do you not just cash it in? You just, his sensation is, the center has to hold. Somebody has to keep it together here. And so Jason steps into that role and then ultimately finds some resources he didn't know he had.
Well, it's interesting because so many of your books are female-led, female-centric, and oftentimes the guys are the bad guys or the weak links. I mean, some of your legal thrillers, you've had some astonishing plots. Really fabulous plots. But most of the time, the women are the heroes, and the guy is not. But here we have Jason who has to, and I really love, this is at the very end of the book, but it's not spoiling anything. But the son actually says to his father, "I never give up," he said. Allison, the sister who's died, told me. We got in a fight and she said, "You never let it go." And later she said she was sorry. And then she said, "It's good to never give up. It's your superpower." And I thought that was wonderful. And it applies to the little boy, and it also applies to his dad, who is not the stuff, as you point out. He's not some Marvel hero. He's not James Bond or whatever it is. But at some point, he, of the 3 of them, the 3 survivors of this 4-person family, he's the one that has to step up and figure out what's going on. But what's the threat, Lisa? Because that also comes up right away in the book. What is the threat that sends them into witness protection? They've been tailgated, but why are they suddenly fleeing?
Right. And I just want to say thank you for pointing that one section out, because you never know what works or what doesn't. And I went back and forth on that, because underlying this book is, like this, what is a hero idea? And you think about that if it's a heroine too. How powerful are you? I think when you look at, like, you go to Marvel movies, like I do go to them. Before the pandemic, and you see why are they 500 million? Why do they make so much money? What is it about that? And I think it's a little bit that we're always trying to understand where are our limits to our power, and I think kids have that a little. And so it's a little bit of a thread in here that's kind of quiet. And I appreciate that, because part of what's happening too is this little boy has to start to come of age at a really hard time. And God knows that's even happened during the pandemic with kids. And so, that they doesn't let it go becomes, rather than annoying, tenacity, resilience, persistence. And that's sort of nice. So I'm glad that worked, because I went back and forth on it. And the threat that happens is, look, I live in an area that is similar to other places in that we have drug issues here. We have opioid problems. We have fentanyl problems. There's overdoses. There's that kind of stuff. And what ends up happening is this family is tailgated and carjacked by an organization that ends up being part of a group that is selling and distributing opioids and fentanyl in southeastern Pennsylvania, which actually does happen here. So it was sort of, I also, because to me, I think the other thing we've learned so much is that crime and violence are something that will touch us in some way. Most people know somebody that's a victim of crime if they haven't been themselves. Same with drug issues. All of these things are impacting us in this extremely complicated time we're living in. And I wanted to make clear that even though this is a guy who lives in a nice suburb, he's not immune from any of that. No one is. and it can reach you at any time. And he finds himself having to grapple with something that really is beyond his ken. And still, he understands that it's of necessity. It occurred to me that, that I should look this expression up because I thought of it the other day, but it was a little bit like how some people are born great and other have greatness thrust upon them. You
That's,
probably know who said that,
no,
Barbara.
that is, I don't remember who said it, but that is indeed a great quote.
Right?
Greatness
Yeah,
thrust upon
right.
them. And let me say this, Lisa. There's a real life analog right in front of us right now in the person of Zelensky, who
Yes,
is the most, in many respects, who would have guessed that he was so heroic? I mean, he's a comedian that was elected president of the Ukraine. And Lord, look how he has dug in, how he has performed, the courage that he has shown, the vision that he has shown. He makes Putin look like, well, the contrast between them is extraordinary. And
I'm
yet he
watching
was
it
a person
24/7.
that, you would never have guessed.
Although
Um,
secretly, Barbara, he went to law school.
well,
That
that's
tells you
true.
something. That tells you
And
something.
Patrick lets us know that it's Shakespeare who actually said
Re-
greatness must. Yeah, I don't remember which play,
Oh,
but it
I'm
is.
glad I had my roots done for that.
There
I
you go. I know.
look it
I love the
up.
chat function because I have these memory lapses or whatever, and Patrick, who's got his phone, is able. Some are
Some more
born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them, which is a
Shakespeare
wonderful
said that?
quote. Mhm.
Wow,
Yeah. So there we
that's
go.
amazing.
Well, you could hardly have a better literary antecedent than Shakespeare, for
Right. Me
sure.
and Bill, we're like tight. Yeah, and that's why you know what I mean. Honestly, I think probably every single book I've written, and you don't even realize this, and I certainly don't go in with it, but you certainly, I think when you reverse it, you realize that you're basically, to a certain extent, an ordinary person getting out of a terrible, terrible jam. And probably that, I mean, that has undoubtedly happened to me in my life, divorced twice for a reason. And also the other calamities. I mean, I hit myself in the face there with a blow dryer. It's like, what? We couldn't have a more difficult time than what we've lived through in recent memory with the pandemic and now with this awful situation in Ukraine. And what do we do? And what are we comfortable standing by and watching? And all of this stuff. And I love how all of these ethical questions and moral and legal and justice questions, should we enter Ukraine and help them, is a justice question. What's just, what's not? And that's what I love about what we write about in this genre.
Well,
Um,
I'd like to think we learn from history. And my view is we're in 1938 when Chamberlain was calling for peace in our time. There's no reason to assume that we have a rational opponent. There's no reason to assume that he's not going to keep this up. And at some point, you just have to dig in because it gets worse the longer it goes on.
I,
Back to
I act,
Shakespeare, it's Twelfth Night, but coming
wow.
back, it's Twelfth Night that that quote comes from. But I really, I mean, if we could fight in Afghanistan for 20 years for really no great purpose, because it's where empires go to die, and that's a known historical thing, I don't understand why we are ducking this particular thing because we're worried about a nuclear war.
I
Because
agree with
he's so
you.
crazy, he may do it anyway. And so, why are we letting him make more inroads? I'm not even militant. I've always been grateful to have been born in 1940 and missed the 1930s. World War II, I was just a kid, right? So I was 5 when it was over. And here we are. And I keep thinking, why haven't we learned from that? You
Well,
know,
I mean, that last book I wrote was Eternal, was historical fiction set during Mussolini's time.
that's
And when
right.
I did that, I ended up teaching myself that as much as I love this genre, that really, I'm Barbara, I'm just telling you, I really come to the conclusion that these are distinctions. People make such a big deal. That's historical fiction. This isn't. And honestly, I didn't know if my thriller readers would come. I mean, but a lot of I read the online reviews. A lot of them say, I read her thrillers. I don't like historical fiction, but I picked it up and I loved it. And what I started to learn was that if you write about these family and justice issues, which is kind of what I've been doing since day one, you can do it. You can set it in South Philly in modern day, Delaware modern day, 1930s Rome, 1942 Rome. All of that is, as you know, a distinction without a difference. It's
Yeah.
it's a form over substance distinction. The story is what's compelling. But I have to tell you that since I've written Eternal and have this sort of got so interested in history, and I'm writing another one now, I am amazed at how even if we know, very few of us know the history, and many of us are willing to look the other way when it arises. We either go into denial or we need to know more about it. I was still amazed, having written Eternal, that no one had ever written about what happened to the Jews of Rome. That's crazy. It's in October 1943. 1940. A lot of people go to Rome, but its history was not written about in popular American fiction till I did it. What? So it's funny. It's funny. I think people have a perception there's a lot of Holocaust books, and I'm not sure that Eternal qualifies as that. I think it's a love story set in that time, but I think there's too few. I think it's what I love about people who follow this genre is I think we're willing to be educated. We want to know about procedures, criminal procedures, forensics. There's a real thirst for that, and we want to learn, but also be moved at the same time. That's why I love what we do. I love.
Well, I love it too. And, we abandoned genre a long time ago at the Poison
Yeah,
Pen. We have
I
a
know.
file called fiction, which, I mean, our shelving is fiction. And I think that people who read can move among all kinds of books. And the only reason that labels are so firmly attached to them now is online bookselling, because they have to put digital tags on stuff. And, I really rebel against it. We sold Poison Pen Press in 2019. I was just appalled to realize that books that I had just thought of as books all of a sudden had to be, and I'm not blaming the new publisher because this is what works for them, but I can't stand the fact that the books had to be segregated and tagged. And do you know there are only a certain number of tags available in that system? So if you have a book that doesn't conform exactly to the fairly rigid number of, I'm trying to remember what there's an actual name for them, BISAC tags or something, then the book can actually wind up being misrepresented because there isn't enough fluidity in the tagging system to allow to really describe a book. But you know what? If you walk into a bookstore like ours, and it happens all the time, people come in and say, sell me a good book, or I'm about to take a flight, sell me an airplane book, or whatever. We don't go to labels, we go, okay, what's a really great thriller? It used to be for an airplane book, we used to sell Nelson DeMille's The Charm School. And right now we're selling the first, what's his name? Greg Hurwitz, the Evan, what's he called? I'm having a moment.
I forget, but I know him.
Rescue me, Patrick. I'm doing it again. But anyway, it's a terrific thriller. But I mean, the real point is, thank you, Orphan X. The real point of Orphan X is that it's just a fun, if you're on an airplane, it's a great thing to read, right?
Well, I think it's also antithetical to books when you think about it, because nobody is more open-minded than people who read. I think I haven't figured out yet if you come to books because you have a lot of empathy, or you develop empathy because you read a lot.
I think it's the second one. No,
You
I
do?
think that
You
reading.
definitely develop it. You definitely develop it.
No, I think absolutely. I think people who read are, we are so lucky in the quality of our customers. We specialize in fiction. So the Poison Pen isn't a place where you come for how to repair your Volkswagen, or, a map of Scottsdale, or whatever it is. It's a place where people come for stories, a place where people come, for, entertainment isn't right, but, a place to spend their time worthwhile. But in the process, and one of the great things about crime fiction is particularly rich in this, and historical fiction is also, in the process, you learn things. You get to travel to different communities, you get to immerse yourself in different communities and cultures, you have to learn really cool stuff. And, I've always felt like I have a head like a giant rag bag, because I've spent my whole life, 70 plus years reading all this stuff. And the amount of disparate stuff that I know how to deflence a body. It's Tide is one of the key ingredients in case I ever need it. There was a woman who dismembered her husband here in Scottsdale, and she was eventually caught. And I thought to myself, if she'd only read Aaron Elkins, she would have known.
I remember Aaron Elkins.
Yeah, she would have known to use Tide, whatever it is, and gotten away with the whole thing. But it's way beyond that. It's the familiarity with other cultures. Other ways of doing things. And one of the really wonderful things that's happened in the last years is the amount of international publication in in their own languages in their own countries of crime fiction. So, the Japanese novels translated into English are completely different than, let's say, Martin Walker writing about Bruno in the middle of France, or Michael Dibdin, who used to write these fabulous Italian books, and now Donna Leon does
Zen.
Venice,
Yeah.
you gave
Zen.
us Rome,
Yeah.
but I had a wonderful talk the other day with a Danish crime writer. She's called the Queen of Crime in Denmark, Sarah Bladel. And in reading her book, I learned a lot about Denmark and, how that society and that community works. Their ideas of justice, Lisa, are different than ours. Their police procedurals are different than ours. And, if you're a reader, you absorb all that. And I
I
think it
know.
makes you more tolerant, more sophisticated.
Exactly. Exactly. And it becomes an orientation so that you're more open to something new. And that's why it makes a lot of sense to me that you don't observe those, these distinctions in the store, because people just want a good story well told. And that's what we're trying to do.
Right. And as they browse shelves that are not segregated, they come
Right.
across, really interesting things. A great benefit of the pandemic, from my point of view, is that a lot of people have been drawn to classics, not just golden age mystery classics, but classics of all kinds. And I think that's wonderful that people have had both the leisure and the interest to go back and get grounded. So stuff like 1984 has become a, kind of a minor bestseller in and so many people. I mean, I forget. I mean, you're about 20 years younger than I am, but both of us have read this stuff, and we don't recognize necessarily that people, let's say in their 40s, may not have ever come across these books. So they
Right.
seem normal to us. Have you noticed the huge number of Agatha Christie plots being repurposed in current crime fiction? It's amazing.
That's interesting. I almost went to see Death in the Nile the other day. I was like, hmm. So I know it's really true. And I think it's also there's something about variety. I mean, when I was looking at writing Eternal and then this one back to back, it was kind of like, oh, it's, I'm always with a snack. I'm like salt and sweet, like pretzels and ice cream. And it was kind of fun to write something like Eternal, which was a 20-year time span and 3 families, and what's going to happen and how are they going to be impacted as they roll forward as the Nazis and come in and these fascists promulgate these anti-Semitic laws and everything. And then you go to Bennett's, and I was like, this is just fun to come back to a narrower focus, not a lesser, not smaller.
Right.
And that's the other thing I love about what crime fiction does, that we're going to focus on a discrete crime, and we're going to see the ripple effects and how it changes lives and how that alters everybody's lives. Because ultimately, the question you're asking about law and justice is how it impacts people. It's not a dry, it's not a brief or a dissertation. It's that law is just a way for us to conduct ourselves. And when we live in lawless times, which to a certain extent we do, we're trying to figure out what the law is and who enforces it. 20 years ago, could people have told you anything about the Supreme Court? No. Now they're like, oh, I watched the Kavanaugh hearings. They know a lot. And unfortunately, our view of the Supreme Court has gone down. Our view of the FBI has gone down. Or at least it's complected. Police complected. We have a lot of disparate views. And when you write a thriller that's in that context, you have to take that into account and try to understand. And I said, well, this is kind of good in a way because it forces the individual into action. It makes him of necessity have to get way out of his comfort zone if he's going to survive. And isn't that what we're doing now? I mean, we're on Zoom because I can't come to Scottsdale, which I hate. But we're going to muddle through this time and hopefully come out the other end happy and healthy and sound.
When we launched Zoom together, let me try it again. When we launched Eternal together last year, also on Zoom,
Yeah.
I know it was a personal story to some degree for you, and it was a story you thought about writing for a long time. And so I wanted to ask you, and you mostly answered it, whether writing Eternal has impacted your approach now to what happened to the Bennetts or future books you're going to write. I mean, it's good to stretch out writer's muscle on top of everything else. It's good to do something different and see where that takes you.
It really is. And I feel really lucky and really blessed that people came with me so that I didn't A, get fired, B, get told you couldn't do it again. Let's be realistic. And I'm working on Sacred now, which is the story of the rise of the mafia in Sicily. And it was sort of interesting to see it Sicily at that time, how there's no laws, and there's so much corruption. I'm always, that we've mentioned this before, how the notion is, the convention is that law leads to justice. And a more modern view is that doesn't always happen. Or worse, that law can thwart justice, or at least there's a disconnect there. But then, Eternal is asking questions: what happens when the laws themselves are unjust, like the Nuremberg laws or the laws the fascists promulgate? And then in Bennett's, you have almost the same situation because it's extra legal. It's outside the law. You're put in Witsex, it's under the auspices of the government, but the law isn't there to protect you. The law is there to get the conviction. And at some point, I don't want to give too much away, but Jason's starting to understand that he's in a position that is not looking out for his interests, even though his family's safe. And I think I also wanted to deal with the rise of, look, we have so much mental stress now. When you look at studies about the past few years, it's all like the pandemic, politics, everyone's all stirred up and polarized. It's having an effect on our national health. The reason for law is to order relationships, but the reason relationships need to be ordered is so people are happy. It's about the pursuit of happiness. And when there is this instability, people get unhappy. So that Jason comes to realize that because his family starts to the wife is getting depressed, the child's losing weight. And so you can put them in a house and guard it and keep them safe, but they're going to implode from within. And I love, in any mystery and thriller, there's a lot of threats. The extrinsic threat is always an interesting one, but a really interesting one sometimes is a threat from within. What are you doing to yourself that will do you in? And that's how do you stop it? How can Jason save his family from this, not only this horrible, drug trafficking organization, but also from themselves, and keep them mentally healthy and whole throughout this ordeal, or even going forward?
Well, you've added also the whole question of grief, because, the child, the girl dies. She's shot, and this is where the dog is not, well, the dog, in attempting to be heroic, actually provokes this action, little Mooney. But you can't blame the dog, because, the dog was doing what dogs do.
Right. Well,
but-
that's interesting too, because it becomes a little bit of for me, I couldn't get the law school out of it because it was a little bit of a causation issue, because everybody kind of blames themselves. He's like, I should have sped up. The wife is like, maybe you should have sped up, because he doesn't in the tailgating. Then the dog, dog precipitates the tragedy, and the boy is like, I should have held the dog more. We do so much of that to ourselves.
But it's going down so fast, that there's no real opportunity for rational behavior in a moment like that. Everybody does what's instinctive, including the dog.
Right. Well, what I wanted to explore too is that there's layers in this novel. For example, when they go away, all their friends try to explain where they went because they can't explain it. So that's when I started to say, this is interesting, especially in the area of social media and true crime bloggers, that you learn, at least I thought to myself, that's interesting. In the absence of a story, people will make up a story. And to a certain extent, that's what this family is doing right then. As you correctly point out, it all happened so fast. Nobody can react fast enough. What do we do? But they all have a story. They create a story out of that night. And to a certain extent, that story plagues them. They tell that story to themselves, and they all three of them have a different reality. What happened that night? And that happens too. And, I kind of love that. I love that we can look at the same set of facts a different way, and then start to disagree on what facts we're seeing.
Well, come on, Lisa. Both of us have done a lot of trial work. I mean, you're a real lawyer, and I read the law, so I always try to make that distinction. I actually had
You're a real lawyer.
a reception Friday night, and was seated where she asked if she could sit with us, a very distinguished judge here in Arizona. And at some point, we talked about my reading the law, and I said, it's so hard to explain, because it's shaped so many things, shapes the bookstore, shapes, talking and all. But if you read the law, you can only take the bar exam and practice in the state where that happens. So you can have a lot of experience. And in my case, did a lot of trial work for legal aid now because I worked for free because I was studying the law without actually being a quote lawyer. So it's too complicated to explain most of the time, but every once in a while I try to. But my point is that we both been in court, and what really comes down to is the best story wins. I mean, in the face of actual fact, even though today we rely so much more on forensic evidence and all, any good trial lawyer will tell you that the key to winning a trial is to have the best story, whether you're the prosecutor, whether you're the defendant. And some verdicts come in the face, like the O.J. Simpson trial, for example, come in, contrary to the evidence because the jury was swayed by the story. And if you're used to that, I think it's wonderful preparation for the kind of books that you write, because you already know that the power of a story can, in fact, shape, whatever's going on, even if it's not truth.
It's so true, and it's so fascinating, because when people say to me, where'd you learn to write? And I really think it was law school.
Of course it was.
Right? You just here's a set of facts, you pick out the ones that you think want to highlight, and then you're going to tell it from a point of view. But it's so interesting, just vis-a-vis for a moment, to think bigger about the power of story. You mentioned Zelensky, and that is so interesting to me, because I think he's somebody who said at the beginning, he's told the story. The story is, we're going to be upstarts and defeat all expectations, and we are going to win. And he made that the story, and they made that story true. And isn't that remarkable that you can achieve justice? And because I think I think Putin is a butcher. I think Putin shouldn't be in power. And I'm glad that somebody actually said that. And so he is offering so much personal. We're talking about a superhero, like you said, but it's also the story. It's not just him, and it's not about him. He made it about the story, about a nation. It's so inspiring. I watch all the videos. I donate a lot. And even as a person like it's off the point, but Chef Andre, there's a guy stepping into the breach, and wherever there's a disaster, he's just going to go and make food. It's like, because he believes that's what you should do. And they're all doing justice and being like love in motion, kind of in their own way. They're all examples to me of greatness thrust upon them, like Zelensky, but Chef Andre too. And isn't that a remarkable thing? Story,
it really is. And
you know what? That's why Lisa, we want to read these books, because they tell us a story.
They do. But, it's my view that despite the controversial aspects of him, England would never have held on if Churchill had not been the prime minister and basically told that story. And Zelensky is behaving just like Churchill. The power of one person to craft a story and a community of resistance and so forth is absolutely astonishing. And Churchill did it. He was a master of prose. And Zelensky has turned out to be very much the same. However this comes out, history will be, Zelensky will be on the right side of history, and Putin will be on the wrong side.
Right. That you can go into your soul and teach a whole country how to conceive of themselves, to see themselves a certain way. That's really powerful.
And to be brave, it's rallying courage. And, people like, we all think, if you know history, you know about Dunkirk, when ordinary people with boats sailed across the English Channel and brought back, and prevented defeat. And that's what they're doing in the Ukraine. Ordinary people are learning to fire, like missiles and do all this amazing stuff. And they obviously need more armament, but it's astonishing to me. And, that this personal example can rally that. And so in your way, in a way, your guy, Jason, is attempting to do the same thing. I did have one question, and this is because I didn't read that. I read so fast, sometimes I miss stuff. Why were the bad guys tailgating this family? Were they just in their way on the road, where they were trying to make time? Or is it going to be a spoiler if you tell us?
And it will be a spoiler if I tell it. I'll tell you off the.
All right. we won't go there. You're going to have to read the book to find out. So just before we cruise to questions, let me just point out, I wrote them all down here if I can get them all in again, that there was an amazing number of great things about this book before it published. Highly anticipated thriller of 2022 from BuzzFeed, Goodreads' most anticipated spring book and most anticipated mystery of 2022, Publishers Weekly top 10 mystery thriller of 2022, BookBub's most anticipated mystery and thriller of 22, top 10 editors pick for March by AudioFile, and a Library Reads selection. Now that is a huge amount of what in the publishing industry we call buzz, which basically
I'll take it.
What it really means is that a lot of influencers in the book world are taking a position, and that's a really big thing. So Eternal had remarkably the same, I think. I could go through a whole list of all the wonderful things that were said about Eternal, and I think it's wonderful that. Do you think Eternal actually has pushed more buzz towards this book, Lisa?
You know what? I don't have any evidence of it, but I do think it. It's interesting. I'm so lucky, honestly, and so blessed to still be writing books. And when I decided to try to do Eternal, and there was a risk involved, yeah. I just said, "What are you on this earth for? I mean, what really? Why?" And if something your really heart is speaking to you do, then you should just do it. And it was that whole exercise, everything. I mean, I don't bore you with my own psyche, but it taught me a lesson, which was, yeah, okay, if not now, when? If not, why not you? Kind of. So what it did for me is it made me think a little, and I think Bennetts is a better book because I wrote Eternal. And thank you. And I was like, it's just different. It's more layered, because also vis-a-vis history, there's a little more of his personal history in there. When you write a series like Rosado, which I love, and I'm going to get back to one of these days, you have like 17 books to tell somebody's history. People who pick up book 15 know book 2. They know the character's history. And I think because I had such a regard for the history of those 3 families in Eternal, I said to myself, you have a little more, you can do, like, put it in. We learn on the job, Barbara. What do we know? We just try to figure it out as we go. And I thought, all right, let's see. And so I'm very, very committed. I just feel like, I'm saying between you and me, forgetting if there's people watching, it's more like, I think as I've gotten older, I've started to think of this as me time. Maybe because my daughter's all grown up and, as you say, has her own books. And what do I really want? What do I really want to write next? And why do I want to write it? And how is it going to be better than I've done before? And I have the luxury of time now. It's just me. I'm alone in the house, and I'm not going anywhere. So I guess it's just a way that I feel very grateful, because I get to do it, and I get this new challenge, and I just love to get up, and I think to myself, I get to write today, even though it's hard. I don't want to make it anyone. I really want to encourage people who want to write, but I never think, oh, I got to work. I always think, oh, I'm going to get interrupted at 3 o'clock because I have an interview, but I get to work in the morning. And I think about Lawrence Kasdan said, being a writer is like having homework every day of your life. It's a little true. I mean, like, especially a book like this, because you're like, how are they going to get it? What's going to happen next? How are they going to get out of it? You walk around the block, you walk the dogs, you take a shower, you talk to yourself, you say, well, this is what you have to do. Then you have to do that. And it's such a crazy life, but it's so wonderful to be involved in a story. And it has to be so meaningful to you. And it has to make you feel inspired at the end, because it has to power you as you go through the hardships in your own life. I think that's why books matter.
They do matter. I'm not a creative person, but I have found as the years have gone on, this is the 32nd year of the Poison Pen, I feel like a caretaker, a caregiver, so to speak, of other people's stories. My job is to, take Lisa's story and bring it to you. And in the process, I will say that despite the drawbacks of not having live events, Zoom has allowed us, Lisa, to have much more intimate conversations at our leisure than we were able to do when we had a huge room full of people. And part of our concern was, time management, people management, all the rest of it. Patrick and I have talked about the fact that with some authors, we've had really surprising interactions that were never possible without this technology. I think it's a miracle that this came along at the moment that we most needed it.
Too. And that's so nice. It's so interesting you say that, because I've always loved my visits there, and we clown around and stuff, and we stand on the chairs, but I did realize I was speaking to you very personally, and I was like, Lisa, this is like you're signing, like try to act professional for a change. But you're right. There's no one here but me and you. We're old friends, and we love to talk about books.
Very true. And our friend from Mongolia is either listening or he isn't. We had a wonderful moment when, because we launched Harlan Coben's The Match last week.
Hey, I got my copies from you.
Well, thank you. And the first question was from our customer in Bucharest, Romania. And the first thing he said to Harlan was, I've read 34 of your books. And Harlan was just like, and we didn't ask him whether he'd read them in English or he'd read them in Romanian. But I thought, wasn't that wonderful? Harlan would never in a million years before Zoom would our friend in Romania, who may well be watching right now, and if so, hi, would never have known that there was a passionate fan in Bucharest who's read 34 of his books. I mean, I think that's so great. And now we should call Patrick up, and so he can tell you whether you have passionate fans wherever they are. I'm sure you do, who would like to talk to you.
No, I'm the only person who doesn't have Zoom fatigue. I love it.
I
just love it.
Some days I do 3 of these, and I really like it.
I do too. It's so nice.
Patrick has absolutely flourished, not just Patrick, but John of our staff, who has absolutely blossomed out and is running he's running a completely parallel Zoom track on Sunday mornings with authors. That is astonishing. And, isn't it interesting, Patrick? He's just like taken over this whole event track and created one of his very own. I think it's
Can I say 2 minutes of props to you, because you are always you're ahead of every curve. But you are so ahead of the curve. You were filming these interviews before any of this happened.
Lisa, we did our first one in 1995 with PD James. I mean, that was our first. We have, you can go back forever and see author interviews on YouTube.
I watched mine.
Yeah. Patrick has a studio now in the store. So all of our live events, which we were videoing before, but they're better. We just, every once in a while, we still have some work to do on the soundtrack, because the Zoom soundtrack is actually better than the in-store video soundtrack. So that's been our one little weakness, but we're working on it. Patrick, do we have questions?
We do, yeah. Let's see. Bruce wants to know, will the cone be coming off your poor dog soon?
I'm so worried you can hear them bark. One's barking. Can you hear that? I hope not. Yes, one of the dogs has a cone on. Very dramatic about it. He hurt his paw, and hopefully it will be off in a week, because he's kind of dumb, so he can't get through any doors, and he sleeps under the covers, and then it's like this. Well, it's probably more than you want to know, but then you have to lift the cover up, and then he goes and he gets stuck, and you have plastic bonking you in the face when you're trying to sleep. This is what it's like to be me. Life with sleeping with 3 dogs and one with a cone. So Bruce, thank you for asking in. If it doesn't come off soon, I'm going to take it off, because I'm not getting any sleep from this dog.
Or you could, in our case, be sleeping with wet puppies who've been out in the rain and absolutely hate it and come and want to get under the covers with you. Yuck.
Can you give us an animal status report in general? How many do you have now? How many dogs? How many cats? How many other creatures?
I have 3 dogs. I have 1 cat. She's around here somewhere. She's a little standoffish. My daughter Francesca took my other cat because she said that I wasn't meeting her emotional needs, the cat's emotional needs. I was like, it's a cat. But I mean, because this one cat could care less. She doesn't even recognize me. The cat has lived with me for 13 years. She has no idea who I am. Like, you're supposed to love me. Okay, that's a digression. I have 14 chickens, hens, one rooster, Bradley Chicken Cooper. I have officially the oldest hens that my chicken vet, and yes, I have a chicken vet, has ever seen. I mean, I have hens that are 14 years old. They have no eggs anymore. I don't either. No one is kicking us out of the house, though. We're all fine. And I have 2 horses. Sadly, I lost 2 horses this year. Everything's getting very old here on the farm, but we're still kicking. And that's, and I have a barn cat. So I have 2 cats.
2 cats. That's quite a menagerie.
You know, no, what's so great about being me is that there's no one here to stop me or tell me I can't. I get to do whatever I want to do, and it's the best thing ever.
That's great. Tori has a good question. She says, Lisa, I was introduced to your humorous essays after you spoke at the PLA conference in Philadelphia.
Right.
Which title was your last collection, and will you be publishing more at some point?
Well, first of all, I want to say thanks to Barbara for this, because not every bookstore carried those books, but you did. And I really, really, right? You might not know that, but you did. And I really appreciate it. And I love doing them. The last title, I have to look on the website. I think it's I See Life Through Rose-Colored Glasses. I haven't really tried to get another book deal for them, but the good news is I write every Sunday for Chick Wit, for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I own the copyright to that. So I publish that on my Facebook page. So every morning at 9 o'clock, every Sunday morning on 9 o'clock, you can go there and read one of those funny things, and they'll be there for you for free.
Cool. Yeah. And you did quite a bit of that with your daughter, right?
Yes. And she joins, she writes some and I write some.
There's 9 of them. And indeed, I See Life Through Rose-Colored Glasses is in fact my personal favorite title in all of this is your first one, Why My Third Husband Will Be a Dog. Which
I love
well
that title. I get so much grief for that title, but I do want to, at some point I want to try to put them together in another book. And I really want to call it Why My Third Husband Will Be a Dog, Volume 2. What do you think?
I like it. I
like it too. It's so funny.
Let's see here. Okay. Yeah, there are a couple of questions just about, who are some of your favorite authors? You're always so supportive of other writers, your peers, been knowing you for a long time. You're constantly ordering new books from your friends. And who do you love? Who do you go back to?
There's so many. I love everybody. I know that sounds dumb, but I really do. I just feel like I learn from every book I read. I love Harlan. I love David Baldacci. I love Louise Penny. I love Ivanovich. I've got some really very nice blurbs, some people like Riley Sager for this book, whom I love. Megan Abbott, Alistair Burke is terrific. Oh my God, there's so many. And I know I'm like blanking.
What are you reading now?
There's nothing I don't read. There's nobody that you could mention I don't read. Michael Dibdin, I've read. Don Leon, I read. It's really weird, but like this is just the research books. This is my like winter office. Like I have fireplace there. I'm showing you my office now, a little sneak peek for Barbara only. But I just love to read. I read all the time. I know I'm just forgetting everyone, but everybody knows I love them. Sandra Brown, I love. I've done gigs with her. She is a hoot. There's just so many terrific. Luann Rice is terrific. Name some, and I'll tell you if I read them. But I do.
Are there any kinds of books that you read that might surprise people? Do you have any guilty pleasures?
Well, the short answer is I'm not guilty about a GD thing. Okay. I'm not guilty. I'm a good girl. I got nothing to be guilty about. And reading, you should go right to heaven. Like if the thing you're doing is reading. I think I read a lot of nonfiction that people might be very surprised about. Like for Bennetts, I had, I'm gesturing at the book. I had to learn all about salt marshes. Then I got all involved with different birds and seabirds, just so I could have an authentic bird. And then I learned all about blue herons, because when I went to research the book, I went with my bestie and my assistant Laura, and we go down there, and it's the pandemic, and we're in the car, we've got masks, there's nothing around, and a blue heron flew over us, and I was like, first of all, I'm a city girl at heart, and I still haven't shaken that yet, even though I'm like so old and live in the country. So when it flew over me, I'm like, oh my God, like sometimes nature is so stunning. And during the pandemic, remember that there were all those stories about nature was taking over? Well, that was when I was doing the research for Bennett's. So it really was like that. And I went to a nature preserve because I wanted to learn all about these salt marshes. And it was like, what the hell is going on this planet? I like wanted to get back in my car and get home. But I mean, I was in awe of it, but it seemed it was scary. And so I read a whole lot about birds, and I'm going, you've really lost your mind now. I mean, one of those books is back on that shelf. I just started buying Audubon. It was crazy.
I got to ask you about the Bennetts. Was that always the name for the family? Or was it, first draft, what happened to the Hamiltons? Or how did you come up with the name for the family?
You know what's funny? I said Bennetts, and I liked it. And then I went back and forth forever going, you got to think of a better name than that. And then also you have where the apostrophe S goes. And that's always a bitch too. Sorry. But that, I was like, their last name is Bennett. So that means it's going to be Bennett says, and readers don't like that. And I really wanted to shake it, but I couldn't shake it. I kept coming back to, it. And then of course, when I said on some Twitter that the book was coming out, some guy named Bennett wrote me and said, what happened to my family? And I was like, so I'm going to buy him a book and send him a book. But it just came to me. It's funny how that stuff happens and you can't get it unstuck. You can't stick it out of your head.
Let's see here. Yeah, we just got some questions coming in on YouTube.
Cool.
Let's see. Arlene wants to know. She says, one, what was the most inspiring part about writing this book? What was the most challenging? Is there still a story that you aspire to write? I'm sure there is.
The most challenging and also in a way the most inspiring was that, you have a family who are innocent. And so they are put in a situation and that they're under threat. And like we were talking about before, that we've kind of lost faith in institutions. And what follows from that to a certain extent is that we lost faith a little in people. So that we're not sure, like, in other words, it's not so easy to tell who the good guys are. And so when Jason finds himself in this situation and he starts to realize that he's smart and knows a lot about law, because also even as a lawyer, I was a paralegal before. I love that there's a lot of people who are in law jobs that are not necessarily lawyers. And honestly, I hate that they don't get the spotlight because they know an awful lot and they deserve the spotlight. And so I know a lot of court reporters. And so that's sort of interesting because in terms of the layers of truth, here's a court reporter, which is what he is, an elite one, which we can explain in the book. And so it's funny, at one point he thinks, I'm the only one in the room who in the end, what he does is he warrants that the whole record is true and correct. He isn't warranting that the facts are correct. He's warranting that this is a correct and accurate and truthful reproduction of what he heard. And I love the layers of truth. And I thought, in a way, that's like now, where, I don't know, we wouldn't have to get into politics, but we'll look at a guy like Bill Barr. He's our attorney general. He was our attorney. Is he a good guy or is he a bad guy? Or is policing? We have a lot of different views about police, depending on what your color or whatever. You'll have different experiences with police. Are the police good guys or bad guys? Or how flawed is everybody? And how do we navigate this world in knowing that? Because it's true. And now we know it. We have a very realistic view, or maybe, people might not think it's realistic. Everyone has their views about it, but it's certainly not the Perry Mason, law leads to justice. The innocent guy never gets convicted. The guilty never walks free. The judge is beyond reproach, beyond reproach. I clerked for 2 judges. I clerked for a state appellate chief judge and a federal appellate chief judge. And I will tell you that they were beyond reproach. And when I grew up in the law, I revered the Supreme Court and I revered these agencies. And DOJ, I would have killed to work at Department of Justice. As Barbara will tell you, it was a creme de la creme that went there. Well, that's certainly a view that is subject to change. And so as soon as that happened, the most challenging part of this book was who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? And at one point there's a bad guy and Jason starts to go, you're a good bad guy as opposed to a bad guy. And this guy's a bad good guy. And it's really kind of real in a funny way. That was really hard because it really involved writing realistically, but also finding a way to find the truth and inspiration from it. And I think I did. I hope I did.
This is
That
such
good
an
guy. That's a
ancient-
great title.
Yeah, this is such an ancient question. You can go all the way back to Plato. Remember, who shall govern the governors?
Right.
And, I mean, that is something that has confounded us from the earliest civilized organizations is if you put somebody in charge, who's in charge of them?
Right.
Who is it?
Right.
And, in the other one, which is unfortunately true, and the New York Times did a really, I think it was the Times, not the Journal. Well, surely the Times wouldn't have been the Journal. Did a really interesting article over the weekend about how did Putin metamorphose from what looked like a
Saw that.
statesman 20 years ago
Right.
to a reincarnation of Adolf Hitler. And, it's trying to hold on to power corrupts, whatever it all might be.
Right.
It's, it's an age-old question. It really is. And it's
and it's-
never been resolved.
No, and here to find, because I grew up at the time when you would be like, could it happen here was the question, meaning Nazism. And now I think we've kind of, unfortunately, may have answered that question. But what's in the plus side, the thing that's so inspiring to me is the beauty of this country and of democracy. It, as we say, it's messy, but that we all have votes and people are going to fight for those votes and we're going to have to figure out how to govern because at least we live in this place that, people are bleeding for in Ukraine, right? In Russia, you hold up a blank sign and they arrest you because we all saw that video. And that's unthinkable to me in this time. And it's just awful. You do have the right to pursuit of happiness and free speech and all these wonderful rights here that are guaranteed in the Bill of Rights. And they're not to anyone else who isn't fighting for it. And it just reaffirms to me how incredibly lucky I was to be born here. Think of my dad in World War II and so many people who fought. And, I think your analogy is really apropos. Appeasement, Chamberlain. We may well be there again. And we just have to recognize it when we see it. And prevail.
Able to act
Just
on
like
top of
Zelensky.
it, which is hard.
Just
Sorry,
like
Patrick,
Zelensky.
that was a digression from your question, so my apologies. Carry
Not
on.
at all. Well, Joseph's coming in at the right time here. He says, pardon the sidetrack, but Lisa looks absolutely fabulous with her new hairstyle. And that's what I was saying before we got started.
That's so nice. Thank you, Joseph. I appreciate that. Oh, that's so nice. I did it. I just was having a pandemic. I have to change something. I had to change something. And I changed it. So
It's lovely. It really looks great. I like it a
you
lot.
always look amazing.
Anything else there, Pete?
Well, let's see. Well, a couple of people are just asking about your writing process. We get these questions a lot, and
I love those questions.
how do you get the words out? Do you have a schedule that you adhere to rigidly, or what's your secret?
My secret is don't judge. Philip Roth said, your job is to write it, not to judge it. And Anne Lamott says, give yourself permission to write a shitty first draft. And so I do 2,000 words a day. I only got 893 today, but I get a break because I did this. And what I try to do is just I'm telling the story to myself. I don't have an outline because I don't want to live my life. And that's individual. I know people do. Barbara, you probably know the people who do. I mean, they're the cool people. They have it together. The gonzo people like me, the divorced twice crowds, like, I might be in love. Let's find out. It's not we don't really plan. So I just was like, I say to myself, get it down, then get it good. I remember, I quote Hemingway to myself, write drunk, edit sober. I don't write drunk, obviously, but I do get the story out and make myself do 2,000 words a day in first draft. No looking back. You can't edit before. That's easy. You got to go forward and try to figure out the next thing and what happened. And before you know it, you have a draft and you might have a story. All the twists are surprising to me. The surprise ending is the biggest surprise of all. In Bennett's, I was dying because I was like, what are they going to do? How is he going to get out of it? And vis-a-vis superpowers, this isn't a guy, he doesn't shoot guns and he's not an expert. You know, when you have a non-expert, you have limits to credibility. And so you have to play by those rules. So, and that's what's cool about it because, and he figures it out. And so I struggle through just like everybody else. And once I have the first draft done, then I just try to make all the sentences better and make everything make more sense. And then for people who read our kind of thing, take out everything, you know, Elmore Leonard, right? Take out the parts people skip. I actually thought that the other day. I thought to myself, they're going to skip that. Don't write it. And it's taken me 35 years to be able to do that. I finally said, oh my God, that's what he meant. He's right. Don't even start writing it. You're just wasting your time. You're going to take it out. And even if you left it in, they would skip it.
How long does it take you to write a first draft?
Well, so in theory, at 2,000 words a day, working every day, 7 days a week, it should take 2 months. But it doesn't for some reason. And I, you know, if there's something bad happens, or I go visit my daughter in New York, or I actually try to do something fun or something. But well, for a long time, for 10 years, I was doing 2 books a year. Yeah. Until Eternal, I was doing 2 thrillers a year. Yep. Domestic thriller, legal thriller, plus humor. And Eternal was such a bigger project. And also, it was more that I was nervous, honestly. I just was like, Sheryl Sandberg said a great thing. She said, you know, women, we don't want to admit to ourselves we don't take risk easily. We just say we're not ready. And for a long time, I was like, well, you've done the research on Eternal, but you're not ready to write. You've learned all about Mussolini, you practically memorized his speeches, but you're not ready. You're not ready. You're not ready. Finally, just like, oh my God, you're not getting any younger. You're going to keel over. You know, sorry. But that's how I talk to myself. Just start and do it. And I swear to God, I wasted the time. I could have done it. The second historical thriller I'm writing, I should have it done in 6 months. I want to do 2 books a year. I like that. It gets me out more. I don't want to wait a year for the next book. I like to come out of my cage. If I have to write a book to do it, I will.
Are you a morning person or a night creature?
I'm not a night creature anymore. I used to be a night creature, but I love mornings. If I get like a large cup of Dunkin' Donuts coffee with extra cream, extra sugar, I'm so good till 1 o'clock. And then I can eat and then go back. Morning.
Yeah. Unfortunately, age makes it harder to be a night person. I used to be an all-night person too. I used to sit down at the bookstore when everybody else left, like 11 o'clock at night, and write our newsletter and stuff. I would go home at 3 or 4 in the morning, and I would pass my husband, the morning person, and he would be leaving as I was coming home, you know, and I hated it. But
right.
now,
I used to be.
Now I've had to change my rhythm. I just don't have the stamina anymore, and I think that it's much harder to be a night person when you get older. It just is.
It's funny, yeah. Diana Gabaldon, you if you want to contact her by email, like 3 in the morning is the good time. You can count on her always being up.
I've called her at 1 o'clock. You know, every once in a while when I have something I really have to ask her, I know she'll answer the phone at
1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, that's when she works. She works at night. That's when she says, and I think it's a really wonderful phrase, you might adopt it. That's when the magic happens.
Okay.
She's alone with her
something right, so maybe I will.
She's alone with her imaginary friends. The world's asleep. And she's in the world that she's created with her imaginary friends. And it's magic for her. The other good thing about it is she never has jet lag because her sleeping schedule is what it is. And she travels so much and she never suffers from jet lag. I'm so envious of that.
Wow.
Anyway, talk about a digression. Back to reality, Patrick. Is there a wind-up question?
Let's do one more here. Kathy says, I love listening to books. How does Lisa feel about that? Or does it matter to her how her audience enjoys her books?
Oh my God. I'm very happy. First off, thanks, Kathy. In any way you want to enjoy my books, you can. I am an audiobook freak now. And I was lucky enough to I requested this narrator, Eduardo Bellerini, for What Happened to the Bennetts, because I thought he had done such an amazing job on the audiobook of Eternal. He read the parts of Marco and Sandro, and Cassandra Campbell read the parts of Elisabetta. We were talking about the power of story. I mean, when I'm finished a book or when I'm working on one, I say I live alone. I mean, I can talk out loud to my computer. I read it out loud so that I can hear if it sounds blubby or it's awkward or the sentence is too convoluted. And that you just want to get, it's like, I always think it's a tumbled stone. Just keep tumbling it and tumbling and tumbling. So it's nice and smooth. So I love audiobooks and I'm really, really proud of this. I loved Eternal and he's done an amazing job with What Happened to the Bennetts.
Let me add that knowing that audiobooks have become so popular with so many people, my husband, he has translated all of our Zoom events into podcasts, and we're at 155,000 downloads.
That's amazing.
I know,
That's
but I think it's a
wonderful.
wonderful way for people who don't want to sit in front of a screen, Lisa, they can listen
Right.
to us. You
Right.
and me and Patrick, and it's absolutely, I think, a terrific extra feature of doing these events is that we have an audio track that we turn into podcasts. So for those of you who prefer audiobooks, you can go to poisonpen.com and click on podcasts, and you've got like a gazillion you can download.
That's
and
just
listen to.
terrific. You are always ahead of the curve. And that's such a good idea because I listen to podcasts. I walk the dogs, that's my thing.
Sure.
And that's my time. And it's so great. What a time we live in where it's so rich. You can listen to this at any time you want. This is on demand. It's just the best
Right.
ever.
That's why we don't do tickets. Because if you do tickets, it's basically like going to a play. If you don't show up when the curtain goes up, you miss it. So we have resolutely refused to do tickets so that people all over the world can watch this conversation or listen to this conversation whenever it's convenient for
That's
them.
great. That's great.
And thanks to your kindness in signing books, it is a sustainable program. So it's been wonderful. So Lisa, thank you. I mean, it's always a joy to talk to you ever since our first encounter in the bathroom at the New York Sheraton, which is where we first met. And it's been going ever since. So thank you so much for spending time with us. Patrick, thanks for your wonderful, as always, support. And good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And don't forget that our autographed copies at some point will turn up at the Poison Pen, so you can
Yes,
buy one.
it makes a great gift for Mother and Father's Day. I'll be happy
It
to sign
does.
it.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Stay well, everybody. Miss you guys. Love you.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.